The night should have felt festive, but from the moment I stepped into that grand dining room, I knew I didn't belong. The chandelier sparkled above, every glass polished, every silver utensil lined up like soldiers on parade. Guests moved gracefully around the room in shimmering gowns and tailored suits, their laughter floating in the air like music. I stood there holding my pie, wrapped in the same checked towel I had used for decades, suddenly embarrassed by how plain it looked against the spread of catered dishes arranged on crystal platters. I had baked it with love, the same way I once baked for my husband and son when our kitchen was the center of our world. But here, in this house, love had no place on the table. My pie was placed at the far end, almost hidden, as if it were an afterthought. No one touched it, and when my daughter-in-law swept past, she made it clear I had no role in this celebration. Her words cut sharper than the knife she used to carve into the roast. I was not needed, not useful, not welcome. What hurt most was not her cruelty. It was Ethan's silence. My son stood nearby, wine glass in hand, his eyes fixed on nothing, as if pretending not to notice. I kept searching his face for some flicker of recognition, some defense of the woman who raised him. But there was nothing, only silence. The same silence that has grown between us over the years, thick and suffocating. I sat quietly, listening to the clinking of glasses and bursts of laughter, feeling myself shrink smaller and smaller in that perfect room. I used to be the heartbeat of my family, the one who held birthdays and holidays together. Yet there I was, invisible, reduced to a shadow in the corner, while strangers celebrated under my son's roof. When the night finally ended, I walked out into the bitter cold with no one stopping me. The streets were quiet, Christmas lights twinkling from other houses where warmth and love still lived. As I drove home, my hands stiff on the wheel, the truth settled heavily in my chest. I was no longer part of my son's family. I was an outsider, and I would soon learn that being unwelcome at that dinner was only the beginning, because the betrayal ran far deeper than I had imagined. It all started months before that dinner, with what seemed like such a small request. Ethan had called one afternoon, his voice carrying that gentle persuasion he used as a boy whenever he wanted something he knew I might hesitate to give. He told me it would make things easier if I added Vanessa as an authorized user on my credit card, just for family emergencies. He said, they had Tyler to think about. After all, what if something came up and she needed quick access to funds? I remember sitting with the phone pressed to my ear, torn between instinct and trust. A part of me bristled my credit card had always been private, something I handled carefully. But another part softened, the part that still wanted to be the dependable mother, the grandmother who never let her family down. I agreed, convincing myself it was harmless. After all, this was my son and his wife. What could go wrong? At first, it really did look harmless. A pair of children's shoes here, a visit to the pediatrician there, the kind of things a family would need. Each month, when I opened my statement, I'd scan through the charges and tell myself it was fine. I even felt a little proud, in a way like I was still contributing, still useful. But slowly, the list began to change. I noticed charges for high-end boutiques, spa treatments, meals at restaurants I couldn't imagine affording. Vanessa would sometimes send a short message of thanks, polished and polite, but never warm. Her words felt transactional, like a receipt acknowledging payment rather than gratitude. I tried to dismiss the unease that crept into my heart. I told myself she deserved nice things. That maybe Ethan wanted her to enjoy the life he worked so hard to provide? Still, there was a small voice inside me whispering that something wasn't right. Each month, the totals grew larger. The little family expenses that once seemed reasonable faded away, replaced with purchases I could never have justified for myself. I would stare at the numbers, my hand hovering over the page, and remind myself that family means trust, that keeping harmony was more important than asking questions. But deep down, I knew I was being taken advantage of, even if I wasn't ready to admit it aloud. I told myself silence was easier, that saying nothing would keep peace at the table. What I didn't realize then was how costly that silence would become, not just for my bank account, but for my heart. The breaking point came on a gray morning when the mail slid through the slot and landed at my feet. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table, my coffee still steaming, and opened it without thinking. I had grown used to seeing a few $100s here and there, the kind of amounts I could absorb, even if they stung. But this time, the numbers leapt off the page and stopped me cold. Thousands spent in a single month. Designer jewelry, luxury furniture, a weekend getaway at a resort I had never even heard of. The balance was staggering, a sum that would take me years to pay off if I didn't act. I sat there staring at the statement, my hands trembling, my chest tight. All those years of living carefully, of clipping coupons, of saving for Ethan's future and my own modest retirement. What was it all for if it could be drained away so easily? I thought about the nights I stayed up sewing clothes for him when he was a boy, the lunches I packed with a little extra snack tucked inside, the times I went without new shoes so he could have the ones he needed for school. Every sacrifice I had made, every penny I had pinched, seemed to have been forgotten. I told myself I needed to hear it from him. I picked up the phone, my heart pounding, and asked him why. Why were these charges being made? Why was I being left to shoulder it all? His response still echoes in me. He brushed it off, said I was overreacting, that Vanessa was part of the family now, and I needed to stop making her feel unwelcome. His words weren't sharp, but they cut just the same. It wasn't just the dismissal, it was the indifference, the way he couldn't even hear the fear in my voice. I hung up the phone and sat in silence, tears sliding down my face, not just from the money, but from the realization that my son, the boy I raised with love and patience, no longer saw me as a person to protect. He saw me as an obstacle to smooth over, a problem to silence. That was the moment something inside me shifted. The sadness didn't disappear, but beneath it, a spark caught fire. I had spent too long being quiet, too long convincing myself that peace was worth the cost. But now, staring at that bill and remembering the hollow sound of Ethan's voice, I felt the beginnings of defiance. I might be old, I might be tired, but I was not powerless. I knew then that I couldn't let this go on, not for my bank account, not for my dignity, and not for the memory of the woman I used to be. And so, I wiped my tears, folded the statement, and placed it back in the envelope. I had a choice to make. And for the first time in years, I knew I was going to choose myself. The next family dinner was dressed in the same polish as always, glasses gleaming, candles flickering, dishes arranged with the kind of precision you'd see in magazines. I sat at the table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, trying to shrink into the background. Vanessa commanded the room the way she always did, her voice pitched just right to draw every eye. This time, She was showing off a diamond bracelet that sparkled almost as brightly as her smile. She turned her wrist this way and that, letting the light catch every stone, talking about the boutique where she found it. My stomach tightened because I knew whose account that bracelet had come from. It was my card, my balance swelling with each careless swipe. Yet no one else seemed to notice. Guests murmured their admiration. Ethan smiled faintly, and I sat there in silence, the weight of humiliation pressing heavy on me. It wasn't just the jewelry. It was the way she bragged about the new furniture delivery, about weekend plans at a luxury spa, about clothes that cost more than my monthly groceries. Every word was a reminder of how easily she could take and how little I was worth in her eyes. I caught Ethan's gaze once, searching for some sign of discomfort, but he only lowered his eyes and reached for his wine. Then came the comment that sealed it. Vanessa spoke lightly, almost casually, about how older people sometimes hold on to more space than they need. She suggested that downsizing was practical, even generous, because those resources could help the family. My cheeks burned. I knew exactly what she meant. I wasn't family. I was a wallet. But instead of lashing out, I stayed quiet. I chewed each bite slowly, kept my face composed, and listened. On the surface, I was the picture of compliance. Inside, something shifted. Humiliation hardened into resolve. I began to see her clearly, not as the polished hostess she wanted the world to believe she was, but as someone who thought she could strip me of my dignity without consequence. I told myself then that I wouldn't fight her at the table, not in front of the guests, not where she wanted to keep her stage. No, I would bide my time. I would watch. I would listen, and I would plan. She might think of me as weak, but she had underestimated me. By the time I left that evening, my humiliation no longer weighed me down. It steadied me, like a stone I could hold in my hand. I walked out of that house, knowing the next step would be mine, and I would take it quietly, carefully, with all the patience I had learned in a lifetime. After that dinner, I couldn't shake the weight pressing against my chest. I went home and laid every statement across my kitchen table, one month after another, the numbers spreading out like a map of betrayal. I had always lived carefully, stretching each dollar as far as it would go. But here, page after page, I saw tens of thousands drained from my account. Vacations, designer clothing, furniture sets that cost more than I had ever paid for a car. The more I studied, the angrier I became. But instead of letting it consume me, I did what I knew best. Years in the classroom had taught me patience, organization, and attention to detail. I picked up a notebook and began to document everything. Dates, amounts, stores, items. I clipped receipts, highlighted charges, and cross-checked totals. I treated it like a lesson plan, methodical and precise. If Vanessa wanted to turn my life into her playground, then I would turn her arrogance into evidence. As I worked, a darker truth began to unfold. Hidden in the paperwork were notices addressed to Ethan: overdue bills, late payments, letters from creditors. They had been tucked between the glossy store flyers and ignored, as though unopened envelopes could erase the truth. The picture became painfully clear. Their perfect lifestyle was nothing more than a facade. Behind the polished furniture and sparkling jewelry was a mountain of debt, one they had been covering with my good credit. I felt the sting of betrayal cut deeper. My son, the boy I raised with sacrifice and love, was drowning in debt, and instead of swimming on his own, He had let his wife drag me under with them. For a moment, the heartbreak was almost unbearable. But then, slowly, something else rose up inside me. Strength. I realized that silence had only given them more power. Each time I bit my tongue, they took more. Each time I told myself to keep the peace, I handed away another piece of myself, but not anymore. Not this time. I looked down at the pile of evidence, at the pages filled with my careful notes, and I felt a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just a victim. I was a woman with proof, with a plan, and with a reason to fight. That night, before I turned off the light, I whispered to myself the promise I needed to hear: I will not let this continue. And when the time came, I would be ready to confront them on my terms. The decision came quietly, without drama. One morning, I picked up the phone, called the credit card company, and asked them to cancel every card tied to my account. My voice didn't shake. I gave the instructions clearly, firmly, and when I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in months. It didn't take long for the storm to hit. That evening, I was invited, or perhaps summoned, back to Ethan and Vanessa's house. The moment I stepped through the door, I could feel the tension thick in the air. Vanessa stood in the center of the living room, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp as glass. Ethan hovered behind her, a step back, silent as ever. Her outrage poured out like fire. She accused me of undermining her, of sabotaging the family, of being selfish. Each word was a dagger thrown in my direction, but this time, I didn't flinch. I let her rant, her voice rising, her hands slicing through the air as she painted herself as the victim. Inside, I was calm. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking or apologizing. I simply stood there, steady, while her fury ricocheted off walls that no longer contained me. When her words finally paused, hanging in the air like smoke, I spoke. My voice was even, quiet, but unshakable. I told her I knew. I had seen every charge, every luxury, every stolen dollar. I explained how I had documented it, all dates, receipts, even photographs of the items she paraded so proudly. Her face flickered, just for a second, the mask slipping. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between us. I looked at him, my son, the boy I once rocked to sleep, the man who now stood like a stranger in his own home. I asked him with my eyes to say something, to defend what was right, but he said nothing. His silence was deafening. And so I turned back to her. I told her this wasn't just about money, it was about respect, about dignity, about the way she had turned me into nothing more than a bank account. I reminded her that I was not weak, not senile, not blind. I was a woman who had built a life from sacrifice, who had raised a son on love and discipline, and I was reclaiming what was mine. For the first time, I saw her falter. The rage in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something colder: calculation, uncertainty. She realized I wasn't the pliable old woman she thought she could bully. She realized I had proof, and proof was stronger than her performance. The room fell into a heavy silence. I felt my heart beat slow, steady, almost peaceful. My dignity, stripped from me for so long, was settling back into place. I wasn't loud. I wasn't cruel. I didn't need to be. When I left that night, I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I simply walked out, my head high, knowing that something had shifted. The balance of power no longer belonged to her. And though Ethan still stood in the shadows of his own making, I carried with me the certainty that her empire of control was beginning to crack. I had lit the first match, and soon, the whole facade would burn. In the days that followed, I felt the ground beneath me finally steady. I closed old accounts, opened new ones in my name only, and secured what I had left. For the first time in years, I knew my money was safe. I no longer lived with the constant fear of what I'd find when the monthly statement arrived. But while I was rebuilding my peace, Ethan and Vanessa's world began to unravel. Without my credit card propping them up, the bills piled quickly. Collection calls came, letters stacked on their kitchen counter, and the shine on their perfect home dulled almost overnight. The shopping bags stopped appearing, the dinners out dwindled, and suddenly, the woman who had once flaunted her luxury now wore the look of someone cornered. It didn't take long for the truth to surface. The debts ran deeper than I could have imagined loans in Ethan's name. Accounts Vanessa had opened quietly, balances that had ballooned into the tens of thousands. Their entire lifestyle had been nothing more than smoke and mirrors. Without my support, the facade collapsed. There was a sense of justice in it, almost poetic. For every night I had sat quietly, enduring their cruelty. The truth now spoke louder than I ever could. Vanessa had built her castle on sand, and the tide had finally rolled in. And yet, as much as I wanted to feel triumphant, there was an ache I couldn't ignore. Ethan had chosen silence when he should have chosen me. He had let his wife turn me into a stranger in his life. Watching his home fall apart didn't bring me the joy I once thought it might. It only deepened the sadness of knowing I had lost the boy I raised. Still, there was light where I needed it most. My grandson, Tyler, became my anchor. He would come over on weekends, his small hands reaching for mine, his laughter filling the quiet spaces of my home. With him, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't a burden. I was simply Grandma, the one who made pancakes, told stories, and let him be loud and joyful without fear of judgment. Holding his hand one afternoon as we walked through the park, I realized that while some bonds can break, others grow stronger in their place. I couldn't change Ethan's choices, but I could give Tyler the love and steadiness his parents had failed to protect. And in that realization, I found peace. Their collapse was their own doing. My healing was mine. Looking back now, I see the journey for what it was, not just a battle over money, but a lesson about dignity and self-respect. For so long, I told myself that keeping quiet meant keeping the peace. I believed love meant giving endlessly, even when it chipped away at my own worth. But I learned the hard way that love without respect is only exploitation, and silence in the face of cruelty is just another form of surrender. Setting boundaries didn't make me selfish. It made me whole again. Canceling that card, gathering the proof, standing my ground, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my place, about reminding myself that I was more than just a source of money. I was a woman who had lived, sacrificed, and earned the right to be treated with respect. The cost was real. I lost a part of my son that I may never get back. There's grief in that, and I carry it with me. But I also gained something I never expected: peace, independence, a new kind of strength that comes from standing firm when it matters most. And in the middle of it all, I found the purest comfort in my grandson. Tyler. With him, there are no masks, no transactions, no conditions, just love. His laughter fills my home. His little hand in mine reminds me that I am still needed, still cherished, still alive in all the ways that count. Through him, I see hope that the mistakes of one generation don't have to define the next. If there's anything my story has taught me, it's this: love must always come with respect, and respect requires boundaries. When you draw those lines, you don't just protect yourself, you protect the love that is still worth holding on to. Today, I live lighter. My finances are mine to manage. My heart is steadier. And my home, though quieter than it once was, is filled with the kind of peace money can't buy. To anyone listening who has felt invisible, used, or dismissed, I want you to know you are not alone. Your voice matters, your boundaries matter, and your dignity matters. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, even if it shakes the ground beneath you. Sometimes, it's the only way to find solid footing again. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched something in you, I'd love for you to share your own experience in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, please subscribe. Your voice, your story, could be the light someone else needs.